Sarah Whitney, thank you so much for taking time with me. I want to jump right into this. I've known you for years. You're an incredibly accomplished violinist and teacher, but you've gotten into this realm of career coaching musicians who are professionals. I know probably for you, especially people at the mid to upper tier of the music business, people that other musicians may not realize that a lot of them are getting burnt out and they're struggling. What are some of the common struggles that you've been seeing with the music professionals that you've been working with in the last year? What do you feel like other musicians should know? Somebody that they've been a professional musician for 10, 15 years, maybe 30 years, that would maybe benefit them to hear, hey, this is what people are going through. I'm curious.
One thing I find with a lot of these mid-career artists, higher level professionals, is that they might actually not be fulfilled. It's their career might look really great on paper. They've done a lot of things. They've had a lot of success, but oftentimes people get to this point where something feels like it's missing, but they feel like it has to be a secret because they're like, what if people find out that I'm not fulfilled? I've done all these great things. So there comes this sort of hidden part of it because how dare I be unfulfilled when I've had all these great things happen? And what I find is that people don't realize to give themselves permission to change their definition of success over time and know that will happen. The vision that you had or the success you wanted when you graduated school might not be the same 20 years later, 30 years later. And that's okay. And that's exactly what happened to me, wanting to perform, being in a professional string quintet, doing all the things, touring the country and the world. It was amazing. But I got to this point where I was like, something seems off. But I shouldn't tell anyone because then that would be ridiculous if I was to say, I don't want to do this successful career anymore. And if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. It makes sense why, right? Making a shift or changing our identity, if we have an identity of who we have been as an artist and what we really wanted to achieve, and that starts to shift, that can shake a lot of things up.
People are struggling to make a shift, to make a change. How they see themselves, what they see as success, where they want to put their energy. On Instagram nowadays, there's a young culture that's really glamorized, and there's certain things about what it looks like to be a musician that is quote unquote sexy or whatever. If you're 50 or you're 40, or it may be a little, you might have a different mindset. You might not see as many examples of that on Instagram. Well, like when we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, there's different things that people are naturally going to potentially want. Okay, so my next question is, you're helping people, first of all, just envision that they could shift and that success could look differently for them. You're helping them sort through that, which is massive because I think we need that help. Say that they want to make that shift. Maybe they haven't made that shift in 10 years because they got some great gig. Just like you guys were like on the top of Billboard for a while, like with the chamber music group you played with. It was like the biggest gig ever. And you've been with that gig for 10 years. Like, how's somebody going to let go of this thing they've had? And how do they then go get another thing or create another thing? So what do you see people struggling in that regards with, and how do you coach them in terms of, okay, I might want to try something different. How do I even get it started?
Yeah, totally. The first place is one thing I find myself doing with my clients is shaking up the assumptions that they have about how things have to be. I remember a conversation I had with a client of mine who is in New York, big Broadway player, been on Broadway for years, had a lot of success with that. And as we were talking about his desire to create more of his own things, he said something to the effect of, but I just have to work on evenings and weekends every week. That's just the way it has to be. And I really poked holes in that. And I was like, does it? Right? And he was like, what do you mean? I never even considered my lifestyle could be a different way. That may not be what he wants either, but it was just the willingness to be like, oh, what are these expectations or parameters I'm seeing in my career that I assume have to be a certain way? That's the first thing. Like, how do we get curious about questioning that? Because the assumptions that we create aren't based on evidence necessarily. They might just be based on the circles we're in, right? Our experiences, but how do we start to question that? I talk to people about how if you're feeling like something isn't possible, how do you start seeking out people, even just as role models, to see what else is possible? Right? Because if you start looking, you'll find it if you're used to being in certain circles, but start to branch out, look at different artists, the careers they've had, the way they structure it. Because once you start to see other people doing it, you start to say, oh, it could happen to me. It feels scary to make a shift.
So are there any types of things that you have advised people around that recently that you can remember?
Yeah, I think that one thing that I talk to clients about who are newer in this journey is oftentimes they get to a point where they feel like their career is happening to them. Like at one point when they wanted that big job or they wanted a touring career and they worked their butt off to get it, and then they got it, and then they did it for a while, and then they find themselves this place that's, is this what I want? Is this it? So they feel like their career is happening to them. So I help people connect to agency. How do we get back to that place where we can start feeling like we're more of the creator? And I find that can start with, we have to start building our own identity as that type of person. So for example, if you've had a job for a really long time and been in it and you get called up for all these gigs that are great, but it's everyone else's projects. Everyone else is calling you for these cool things and you're like, you feel like you're doing everything for everyone else. What I suggest is you need to start getting clear on what is it that you want. A great place to start is reconnecting with your creativity, with your inspiration, which maybe you lost sight of. How do you start noticing like what brings you energy? What really inspires you? Sometimes people say to me, Sarah, I've been on an autopilot for so long. Thing is, I don't think you have to find it. It's there. What you have to do is you have to notice it. You have to put your antenna up in a different way and start noticing what brings you energy. So I think some examples of that, like for me, something that I realized when I was doing creative strings things a lot, I really loved other genres. I was really excited about learning about improvisation. As a classical player, I was like, who am I like to do this? And I started to notice that when I started exploring those things, I get a lot of energy. I was so curious about it. When we get curious about something, it sparks that excitement in us. And another thing that I started to notice was maybe it could be a musical thing. Maybe it's a genre that you like playing, or maybe it's just a piece you like playing, like just something you really like that you choose. You have to pick it. Or maybe it's a subject. Something else that I realized was I was really fascinated by human behavior. When I started working with my first coach way back when, I was like, ooh, what's this thing? What's mindset? What's all this stuff? And I started reading about it and I was like, this is so exciting. So I started learning more about that. Long story short, now I have a coaching business. But you start noticing where those little energy moments are. And then once you start to be a detective in your own life, how can you spend a little more time doing those things? And maybe it's just 10 minutes a day or an hour once a week if it's like some music you want to play just for fun, for no reason at all, or listening to something that you love for no reason at all. But what happens is you start to relate to yourself as someone that does the things that are important to them. Start small. I don't ever suggest to people, this isn't going to happen overnight. I think we have to remind ourselves of patience and persistence through this process, but you have to start there, because once you start to notice those things, you start to do them, and then maybe they start to grow. And then further down the line, maybe you make different decisions around your career. These are the things that I work with my clients on. You come to bigger decisions and everything. Are you taking accountability and nurturing your inspiration? Are you spending time on that, which reinforces your identity of yourself as someone who does something that's important to them?
If the phone is ringing and you're just picking up the phone when it rings, it's easy to be like, these clients, like this life that I have, I'm going to do this again, I'm going to do that again, and that's what it is. And I should be grateful for it. But you're saying like, what I hear is, hey, wait, do I have some agency? Am I responsible for creating something? Spearheading something. I gotta say, it's part of the reason I wanted to have you on today too, because I've known you for a long time in a lot of capacities, but I've really admired watching you over the last several years, how you have evolved and taken total charge of your freaking life. I resonate with some of that too, because I left New York. I left touring career. The reason I left New York City and I left my job at Berklee College of Music and I left all the touring gigs I had was really just one thing. And it was that I wanted to be closer to my kid. Like it had everything to do with family. And there's so many people when I left New York, you can't leave New York. What are you going to do? There's nothing else. I know you know what I'm talking about, Sarah. I know. Yeah, I think that part of the reason maybe you left also had to do with family, if I'm not mistaken. Like it was a part of it, like your family up Northeast and stuff like that. But also like just your own personal values. And I see what you've done in how you've stepped into all these other dimensions of who you are. It's just, I just freaking love it. And I think this is related, like you've been talking about in some of your materials, which I love your email list. I love the content you put on your Instagram. We'll have all that linked here below. Look for Sarah Whitney.
On Instagram, the handle is @theproductivemusician. I put a lot of stuff out there. My website, sarahwhitney.com.
sarahwhitney.com or The Productive Musician on Instagram. But I think talking about burnout or overcommitment in your career, this is a theme you're addressing in some of your newsletters and your content right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes I see musicians associating success with being crazy busy. And I think that, have you ever asked someone like a musician, like, how are you doing? And they're like, oh, it's so busy, but it's great. There's this sort of, I'm busy, I'm like, crazy things are happening. I don't want to project like my definition of success on someone else. Like busyness can be great. I think that oftentimes musicians they equate that they need to be busy, and that's what means success. So I get curious about that. I think there's certain people I know that just love to be busy and running around doing different things all the time. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you feel that it's happening to you or you don't have control over it, that's where I start to poke holes and say, what is your definition of busy that you want? I think that for me, something that I learned in the pandemic was that when I made the big shift from leaving my quintet, leaving New York, building my coaching business up, I didn't really like working at night and weekends anymore. I do perform at nights and weekends. I'm more selective, and I've created a business and a lifestyle around that. But that was something that I had to come to terms with, especially in an industry which might say, that doesn't make any sense. I wanted more spaciousness. I wanted more space in my career, and I wanted to create my own definition of busy. Is this the type of busy you want? If you could create your schedule, what would it be? I think I see that. I'm curious if you see that as well.
I think absolutely. And again, I think it's maybe when we were 22, we have a vision of this is what it looks like. And if I want to get that dream, I have a certain dream. And if I want to get that dream, I need to throw everything at it. And that means I need to go out every night and have every gig and say yes to every single thing. The dream changes, but we're still stuck in a map of our past that we don't even recognize, that the busyness that you're talking about goes along with it. Because you don't necessarily need to be busy. My dream right now is I want to go to hot yoga every day, and I want to feel healthy and peaceful. And I want to be with my son and my wife as much as possible. And I can't even really think about, and I want to feel creatively fulfilled and have connections and make a difference and things like that. But it's totally different than the old thing. And it doesn't mean that I'm not a musician, but we feel that pressure. I couldn't dare admit that to anybody because they're like, you're not really a musician then. What about back in the days when we were at Eastman and we were talking about all the great things we're going to do? And what's your festival schedule for this winter? Oh, you're not doing crap, man. No.
I think absolutely. And I want to say also, I think my definition of a success, your definition of business and success is not everyone else's either. It's not about making what someone wants wrong. It's about, have you given yourself permission to ask yourself what you really want? Or is there this projection or this external pressure that it should be this way?
Because somebody's out there, if they're out there touring and hitting all the I'm down for you, is whatever makes you happy.
I think that's really what I believe. How do we give ourselves permission to ask some of those questions? And we have to answer them honestly. Would it be easier to just go along with what we know and stay in our comfort zone? But I think at the end of the day, what I want to challenge musicians with, if this is something you're thinking about, is when you look back on your career, like 50, 40 years from now, whatever it is, right? Like, use that perspective. What are you going to want to have done, right? That perspective really helps, because when we're looking forward, the gigs that are coming in, we know that I know how this works. I know that if I take all these gigs, I can pay my rent, I can do this. It's so immediate. And we can lose perspective of the bigger picture. How can we remind ourselves to zoom out a bit? Because we have to look at that zoom out view in order to really get serious about these questions. Yep. Because when we zoom out, we see things differently. For me, like in 2019, before I left New York, I was already starting to feel like, all right, I don't think I want to be touring like this in 10 years. And that's when I was working with a business coach at the time. And it was, okay, that's what I see 10 years from now. I don't want to be touring like crazy. But what do I need to do now to start creating that. That was like where it started. And the zoom out is what I needed because I was in New York. Gigs were coming my way. Things were filling up my calendar. There was no end in sight of this lifestyle changing. So I think that as we look at these questions, we have to zoom out. We have to change the perspective of how we're looking at it, because then we can perhaps come to different answers and be more honest with ourselves. Because I think at the end of the day, what are you committed to? Are you committed to doing the things that are important to you, to aligning your lifestyle with your priorities, whatever they may be, your career with your inspiration, right? How do you show up that way and make action towards that?
People like you, myself, who backgrounds that we had with going to school for music and stuff like that, we came out of it feeling like, if we're good enough, we're going to make it. Yeah. But nobody ever really said, wait, there's this whole discipline of how you actually get work, how you strategically design, not only get work, but let alone design a lifestyle. And it sounds like for you, you worked with someone and you got a lot of those tools and you got really curious about, wait, how can I not be having my career happening to me, being just a victim of the phone ringing, but I want to design it. And you learned a lot of those tools. You worked with coaches that help you figure out the ones that were good for you. And it brings me back to that. I think a lot of musicians, you might have put a crap ton of work in at one point and you got some, because you are good in what you do and you got something back for that. But then if we want to increase the odds of getting work and getting the type of work that we want and getting paid better for it and being able to design the lifestyle that we want, if we are strategic and if we put our energy into certain actions over others. And I hear you talking about that as far as just the brainstorming itself, just the envisioning, but then also going down into deeper levels of the goals and action plans and dipping a toe into the water and opening yourself up to this and setting this up. So
totally. I'm talking very conceptually here about questions to ask yourself and things to look at, which is where it has to start. But I also want to acknowledge that, yes, there requires action and knowledge. A lot about my clients or musicians, like, how do you take that idea and turn it to a reality? Because we're talking about the potential of making big changes. I can dream, I can start to look my inspiration, but at the end of the day, how do I actually replace my income in a different way or restructure my lifestyle, right? So I think I also want to, there, of course, is, you can't think your way to a different future. I think about the combination of, we have to look at the questions we're asking, these conceptual things, a bit of mindset in there. How are you thinking about things? How are you questioning things? What's your perspective? And then the actionable tools. When I think about what I love to, about working with my clients so much, is bringing those two together. You do business coaching, you figured out a lot of these things. We have to merge them with the mindset and the tangible. How do you actually build a project or start to create your own project? Or maybe if you don't want to create your own project, that's fine. But how do you start to shift in a way that makes sense, like logistically? And let's look at how you're negotiating your fees and like all this stuff. It's different for everybody. But I think that I want to just mention that because sometimes like people are like, I can think about all these things, but at the end of the day, there's strategies, there's tools and things that in the entrepreneurship world have to be in place as well.
Yeah. And I would say some of them are the same, but the way that people do them are different. Everybody, if you want to get clients, you got to sell. And I think you got to market pretty much no matter who you are. But if you're Sarah Whitney, that looks very different than if you're Chris Howes. Like the personality behind that, some of the values and style of doing things, and also from completely different lives also. Like Sarah Whitney's life is completely different than Chris Howes' life. And that's part of the reason I want to talk to you, because I admire so much that you're doing it in your way. And I know that 10 years ago, when you made this shift, you had to acquire a lot of, not only dive deep in and get support from coach, but then you had to fight hard to believe in yourself, to learn those skills, to take those actions. And I know you've, in a lot of ways, that you're going to do some of those things differently than me. And I think it's great for people to see what it looks like, what an entrepreneur even looks like. If you look at like yourself, you're extremely elegant. Can I say that, Sarah? You are so elegant and you are so thoughtful. And so it's just, it looks different. Like, but entrepreneurship can look many different ways. And so, well, I want to thank you for being here. I encourage everybody to reach out to Sarah, go to sarahwhitney.com, learn more about her, go to The Productive Musician on Instagram, get on her email list, all that stuff. Thank you. Okay.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Have a great day. We'll talk soon.
See you. Bye.
Bye.